black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
You ever heard of a man who tried to build a secret army of enslaved black people? No? Of course, we know that's not a coincidence. It's by design. Meet Moses Dixon. And his name doesn't show up in your history books because he was ready to fight for their freedom if this country refused to end slavery. That's not a metaphor. That's a documented fact. Moses Dixon was born free in 1824 in Cincinnati, Ohio. He started working as a barber and a traveling preacher, which became the perfect cover for organizing enslaved black people across multiple states. At just 22 years old, he founded the Knights of Liberty, a covert all-black resistance network of over 47,000 trained men. Let me say that again, 47,000 trained, organized, ready to rise up and fight if the U.S. government didn't abolish slavery. This wasn't chaos. It was coordinated black power. They had codes, cells, plans, weapons. And if the Emancipation Proclamation never came, they were ready to burn this country down to free themselves. But Dixon wasn't reckless. He waited, watched, calculated. And when he saw war coming, he shifted strategy. He turned the Knights of Liberty into a liberation network, part underground railroad and part intelligence agency. He helped enslaved people escape, hide, or organize. He wasn't just fighting slavery. He was redesigning freedom on his own terms.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson. I'd like to welcome you to another discussion that I try to be innovative and introducing you to new facts about people of African descent in our history. In fact, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction, and to also, through dialogue, understanding that there can be a shift in consciousness. So my dialogue will be with you, and I hope the information that I pass on to you through this show and all my other shows will give you a shift in your consciousness. And when there's a shift in consciousness, there's a shift in your worldview, okay, how we think. As you heard in the video clip that I put before I came on, this young lady was talking about an individual that I know many of you never heard of. In fact, I never heard of him until I read a book not too long ago, well, about a year ago, that I first heard of Brother Moses Dixon. I heard of another Moses, Black Moses, and that was Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman, I should call her General Harriet Tubman, because a year ago, or in 2023 or 2024, she was promoted to Brigadier General. Most of you do not know that, in the Maryland National Guard by Governor Westmore. And she really deserved it. So now she is one of the first black woman to be a Brigadier General. Seriously, honor to that ancestor. But we're going to go back to this other Black Moses. And this man is very interesting. And as I talk about him, I want you to understand just not him by himself. I want you to understand the world he had to maneuver in and why he did the things that he did. And he should be a model of possibilities for us today. What the world that he lived in the pre-Civil War period of time, we cannot say today that we have it even worse, but we do have issues that's still prevalent in the black community, in our culture. The same type of mindset that existed even in the 1820s and 30s and 40s and 50s, pre-Civil War, and he lived all the way through the Reconstruction area, was no different than the mindset of many white people in power that's in office in government, especially in Washington D.C. right now, running this government. The same type of mindset, that white supremacist type of thinking, he had to deal with. And I want you to understand that we have always been resistant to that. We have never been docile. 189,000, close to 200,000 black men fought the Civil War. We were never given anything. So the footprints that we left behind show that we earned what it became to be called citizens of this country. We built it, we fought for it, and resisted it in a sense because when it was not functioning in our behalf. And he represents that. So I might take some side trips in my story about this man to let you understand what was going on around him during that period of time. Some of the stuff you might have heard from a white perspective, you know, so you'll recognize some of the events, but he was living through all that. He saw it, he experienced it. Just like people gonna be reading about the events that's happening now in 2025, and you're in it, and your experience and how it shapes your thoughts, so did back in the early 1800s. Of this man. Now, let me let you know, I like to show books throughout my dialogue when I do the show. And also, it was also a book that I first came across him. So first of all, let me show you who I'm talking about. And it's this man here. Look at that brother, okay? This is in the 1840s or 50s, okay? This is Moses Dixon. Just like you heard from this young lady who was in that video, yeah, he put together a secret organization that was going to go to war. Now, this is a free black man who could have just went about his life as a barber and a preacher, at first an itinerant preacher that worked on riverboats, and didn't give a heck about his people. But he, like the other great of our heroes, Denmark Vesey in the early 1800s, and Gabriel Prosser and Nat Turner, those folks did what they could to overthrow the system. The mythology of America has always been this great system of freedom and justice, but not for people like us. And these folks here resisted it. No different than the French resistance fighters of the World War II, or the Dutch resistance fighters when they were occupied by a group of people who were threatening them and their lives every day in Paris or in Holland. We had our resistance fighters too throughout American society. Okay, let me go on to the next one. This is the older version of him. I try to do my research. I try to come from various different sources when I talk about him. I just don't Google one person or Wikipedia one statement and then go from there. I try to come from multiple sources. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, this is the book that I first read maybe about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. Black AF, you know what the AF stands for, history. The unwhitewashed story of America. Very good book that you might pick up. And this story about him is in there, where I found out about this one individual that I never heard of, but I found him in this book. And it piqued my curiosity that there is a black man who was going to fight a war against the South if the Civil War didn't pop up between the Federals and the Southerners by the time he was ready to kick it off. Let's go on to the next one. This is another source. This is a contemporary, John Rapier. I don't know if I pronounced his name now, but this is a black man who was the first black surgeon, one of the few black surgeons, not doctor surgeons, medical school trained surgeon, I think University of Iowa, in the 1850s, or so, and he worked at the Freedmen Bureau Hospital. But he was a contemporary of Moses Dixon, and he talked about him meeting him, I think, in Minnesota, and their interactions in his diaries. A lot of people back then wrote in their diaries. So Moses Dixon is talked about by him, and also John Hope Franklin talks about him. And you can find the sources of that information, okay? So I do my research. Let's go on to the next one. And one of the organization that he established in the 1870s, they have writings and documents about him too. So they're the good sources. You see, 1891. That information, and he did many different interviews in the latter part of his life. So the first part of his life, there's a lot of gaps in it because that's when people was enslaved, and a lot of the paperwork and documentary is very hard to find, but they're out there, but there's gaps between them. But after the Civil War, when his amazing life continued after the events about what this young lady talked about, and I'm going to talk about those things as we go on. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, again, this is another source in the Minneapolis Journal, an interview, a book that came out about the Underground Railroad and him and his organization. You can find information about him there. This was printed in 1901. Let's go on. And then I found this young lady who is a scientist and an award-winning scholar of riots and resistance and black history and labor history. And she had a nice article that I also found about this man, So there are sources out there, but, again, all this information is out there, yet you never heard about this man who is just as important to me as Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman during that period of time. But like the sister said at the beginning of the video, there's a reason why. Because we have to be shaped by an image of us being docile, non-active. We were just waiting for a white person because those are the people, white men are the ones who run the system, and if you want the opportunities, you depend on them. That's the narrative. Okay, we have white males in charge today in 2025, and look at the mess we're in. All right, as an example of the nonsense of that. But black people had our great heroes and scholars that we must understand and know. Okay, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that many people are working on fiction, which a lot of us are, if you understand the true history of America. American history is black history, and he was an important part of American history, Moses Dixon. Let's go on to the next one. Now, I'm going to go back to when he was born. He was born on April 5th, 1824, shortly after Robert Dixon, his father, and his slave settled, Hannah, his mother, settled in Cincinnati, Ohio. Okay, that statement might throw you a little bit. Robert Dixon, his father, and his slave, Hannah, who was Moses Dixon's mother, settled in Cincinnati, Ohio. Robert Dixon owned Moses Dixon's mother. He was a slave plantation owner in Petersburg, Virginia. Okay, Petersburg, where they had the great battles during the Civil War, about 50 miles north of Richmond, Virginia. Yes, as I said, the next said that Robert had reportedly freed all his slaves in Virginia before moving to Ohio, and he gave them land in Ohio. That doesn't make it right to me. He had a change of consciousness. Whether he loved his mother, the record doesn't say. What happened, whether they were married, it doesn't say. He just that he is Robert Dixon is his father, and the ex-slave who he freed is the mother of. This is according to Moses Dixon. In 1901, he did an interview at the Denver Post in 1901, a few months before he died in 1901. And this is where this story comes from. Let's go on to the next. Okay, Moses also said in that interview that he had 5 sisters and 3 brothers. There's nothing in the historical record that shows what happened to them. He never even mentioned them because he didn't know. And that's the insidiousness. Like I said, I want you to understand the world that he grew up in. Think of your brothers and sisters, the ones, your older sister or your younger sister that you take care of and love, and they disappear from record because they either were sold off. I think they might have been freed, but nobody knows what happened to them. With this great man and the history that he had and the people that he met, he didn't know where his brothers and sisters were. Or there's no record of where they disappeared to. Okay, let's go on. That's the world that America was like in the early 1800s. His father passed away by the time Moses was 8 years old, and his mother passed away 5 years later. Okay, so he was then trained as a barber and began traveling up and down the Great Western Waterways as a barber on riverboats at age 16. So this industrious young man who lost both his parents went out on his own, younger than age 16, but he found a way of surviving in that world as a free black man. But how free could he be? Again, even though that term is used to define black people around, they were people who were, I put quotation marks, free, but did the society really keep them free, or they just entered a early version of segregation? Okay, they were free in a sense as not being enslaved, but they couldn't go where they want to all the time. But he found a way of doing and becoming a barber on riverboats, and that's how he started making his connections that later on developed and helped him, as you see, develop that organization later on down the road. Started at age 16. On these riverboats traveling through the South is where he was introduced and horrified by what he saw of the treatment given to his enslaved brothers and sisters along the way, along with black children. Black children, we were treated like cattle, just like you move cattle around the country today in other means, whatever the railroads or however we shipped cattle back and forth around. Black individuals were treated in the 1820s or 1830s and the 1840s and the 1850s like that. We were chattel slavery. Okay, even how would you feel you saw how the brother was dressed, no different than white men of his era, but you seeing people treated with chains, little children being carried with chains. You see what's going on with the immigration right now, with these ICE agents running around grabbing people? They were doing that to us, called slave patrols, okay, for hundreds of years. So who better could recognize, in the last election that bothered me, than black people to recognize white supremacist behavior than we did, but we listened to in November of 2024. But that's another story. Let's go on to the next one. All right. He worked on steamships like this is on the records, Orinoco and the Nominee, going up and down the great mid-American river systems like the Missouri River, the Ohio River, the Mississippi River, all those great waterways. He was doing that back in the 1840s. Okay, this young man, okay, seeing these things, making connections, making friends. He must have been a very charismatic young boy and smart in order to make the connections that he had made at a very young age. And another thing, people must understand that during the Civil Rights Movement, all those folks who were doing what we are talking about now today in the history books, or the ones that they're not pulling off shelves, is that they were young people. Martin Luther King in 1857 and 1957 and 1955, and with Rosa Parks, he was just 28 years old. These were young people. And it's in our youth today, that we should depend on to see if we could get the next Rosa Parks or Harriet Tubman to come out. It comes out of our youth, guided by the wisdom of the elders, okay? Let's go on to the next one. Historical records show that Dixon moved from St. Louis, Missouri, to Galena, Illinois, then a major river port down in town and transportation hub. He was constantly moving back and forth, as all sailors do, moving, but he was connecting. But these are the places that he lived, mostly what was called the West after. The West was not California at that time. The West was Ohio and Michigan and Missouri and places like that. It was in Galena that he met a young widow named Mary Elizabeth Peters. She had another name. I don't know if that's her married name or her maiden name, but that's who is Mary. And she was just as important to him. Black women would always by our side. Let's just not forget this fact. They married on October 4th, 1848, 2 years after that meeting. Okay, so that means she was part of it. She helped him set that meeting up that you heard in the video earlier of when they came together with those other men. Let's go on to the next one. So I'm giving you a little background. Moses and Mary were among the first black residents and business owners in St. Paul, Minnesota. Okay, when it was just a territorial years before it became a state. Okay, so they were one of the first blacks. So black people were out west. Okay, they were in territories which became states like Minnesota. Okay, and Iowa and places like that. We were part of the American movement. It wasn't just white people that went west, as we always seen in TV shows. Even so-called historical documentary always show white settlers. Here we have black people who were going out there owning business, not dependent on anybody else, opening their own business. That's one of the things. That's the model I'm saying of this man and the life that he did in the world that he existed in, that it was 20 times worse than what we're going through right now. Models of possibility. If he could do it, you could do it, regardless of who's in the White House. So let's go to the next one. They would travel back and forth between St. Paul and Galena. Now, traveling back and forth, you know what they were doing. They were making connections. There's a reason they would go over. How else can you? I think they opened up a restaurant, and the restaurant was a good cover for people to come with any kind of secret documents. Instead of them going to their house, they would go to what they own. So it didn't look that suspicious. And they also were traveling back and forth between St. Paul, Minnesota, and Galena, Illinois. Okay, it gave them more of a safe space in which Mary was very critically important in helping Moses set up the fateful meeting in 1846. Mary was with him all the way, even before they got married. That's the black woman. That's why I'm always loyal to our black women. They've always been there with us. Let's go on to the next one. After a few years of traveling throughout the South, and after what Moses Dixon saw of the conditions of his enslaved brothers and sisters, Moses Dixon was inspired to act. He saw it firsthand. Let's go on. At the age of 21, he gathered 11 other black men he had met through his travels in a house in Galena, Illinois, owned by one of those black men, a black man owning his own home in Illinois, okay, out west. At this meeting, Moses Dixon and these 11 black men went on to launch a highly secret organization, like the sister was talking about, in St. Louis, Missouri, on August 12, 1846. They met at their house, came up with this plan, met again in St. Louis, and these guys went out all across the country at that time to establish this highly secret organization. Let's go on, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. This is the house that brother owned. It still exists. Okay, I said I did my research. All right. This lady is standing in front of the former home in Galena, Illinois, of that Alfred H. Richards, one of the 11 other men that Moses Dixon gathered to become the founders of the black organization that existed. We did have resistance. Let's go on. The organization led by Moses Dixon and his 11 other colleagues had a lofty goal. Okay, you heard in the video. They planned a 10-year strategic plan for a national insurrection, uprising of black people throughout the South, to put an end to slavery by force of arms. That's what they met for. How many of you heard of this? Or you heard of Nat Turner failed? You heard of Denmark Vesey, and of those other slave uprisings. There were a lot more. There was over 246 slave risings in America and throughout the Caribbean. So yeah, we were never docile and satisfied people. He planned, 10 years. He wanted this plan was going to last 10 years before they strike. This is in 1846 that it came up. What a visionary. He saw the mistakes that happened in Nate Turner, happened too quick. Where was the infrastructure? What kind of plans did they have? And they were betrayed by one of their own. Same thing with Denmark Vesey, betrayed by one of their own, but they didn't have anything afterwards. What do? You had to establish a network, and you had to be patient. That was the brilliance of this brother. Let's go on to the next one. They called this secret organization the Knights of Liberty. They all took this oath swearing, I can die, but I will not reveal the name of any member until the slaves are all free. This is how our people thought. That's not something new. We were not these docile, waiting for the white man to free us. We were going to do it ourselves. We've always been like that. That's what I want you to understand. The narrative that you're taught in school from the time you're a little child is false. We fought back the best way we could in the conditions that we had to deal with even before the Civil War. Let's go on to the next one. Yeah, like I said earlier, the brilliance of Moses Dixon was that he learned lessons from previous slavery revolts and why they failed. Slavery revolts like Nat Turner in Virginia, in the Virginia's uprising in 1831. He was alive during that period of time. He saw the reaction of white people. He saw how they devastated. They were so afraid. One of the things that people don't understand about slavery, it had another, not only had an effect on the black population, it had a frightful effect on the white population because they knew what they were doing wrong. And their greatest fear was that, slave uprisings, slavers uprising. And Nat Turner, they went overboard, but they also caused innocent blacks to get killed. That's why he knew you had to take your time, and we had to do it right, and we had to be patient to set it up. Okay, he learned from these past. Like I always say here, in order to understand the present, you must look at the past to see how the techniques were used and what went wrong and what you could do differently in the now. Let's go on. As Moses Dixon noted in an interview published in the Minneapolis Journal decades later, the Knights of Liberty was determined to organize the slaves throughout the South, drill them, and in 10 years from that time, strike for freedom. 1846, that means it would be like 1856, 57. During that period of time, you had a lot of things going on in America also. Okay, and that's what I want you to understand. I mean, I'm gonna stop this here, and we'll go on to the next things because we'll see what happened with this slavery vote. During that period of time, you know, that's why he took this time, because in the 1850s you had the Missouri Compromise, and you had all these different compromises happen, and he was seeing what was going on in American history that he was taught, that would lead up in about another 10 years to the Civil War. So you see, our people have always been active. Our people have always been resistant. The Walker Papers and things like that, we have never been docile. But I'll leave it right now. Until part 2, peace, hotep, bye-bye.